Let me just read something to you from the Holy Book, and I want you to react to that, okay? And you can't see me, but I've got a copy of the Quran in front of me. There are parts of a Holy Book that talk about people being persecuted and killed. There are parts of a Holy Book that talk about people all over the world being killed because you are my followers. Another quote from one of the Holy Books in this part of the world talks about people being stoned to death with stones until they die. Another part of a holy book that one can read in this part of the world talks about utterly destroying your enemies, spare them not, but slay both man and woman. When you hear those quotes, what do you think that speaks to?
I'd ask you why you're reading the Old Testament to me.
You've had that before, haven't you?
Simple question.
So,
no, it's a simple question. I'm not stupid. You're sitting quoting verses from the Old Testament, thinking that I'm a moron that would think that's from the Quran. I know the Old Testament and I know the Quran. Can I ask you a question? Have you read the Quran?
Yes.
You have?
Yes.
Yeah? So
in English, not in Arabic, but in English.
In English. Are you free, sitting where you are in Doha, to criticise the Prophet Muhammad? Are you free to do that?
Yes, I am. I have had intelligent conversations with my Islamic colleagues on the very same subject.
Can someone in Qatar leave Islam?
Yes.
Is apostasy punishable?
You don't have to be Islamic to be in Qatar. You can leave the country, you can come into the country if you are Jewish.
A Muslim cannot leave Islam. It's punishable in Qatar. The country that you're talking to me from, the country whose tower I'm sitting in, the country that funds radicalisation worldwide, the country that supports Hamas, and you're sitting there trying to take some moral high ground about issues in the world that relate to Islamic extremism, when the country and the people who are paying your wage are propagating that extremism worldwide. I've come into this building and just had to go through an airport-style scanner, and when I asked why, they said because of the Paris attacks.
Tommy, I do have to move the debate on because I do have to move the debate on. Yes, of course I do.
Of course you do.
All right, Mr. Vickers, I mean, it must have caused you a lot of sadness, you being a Muslim, to see the protests in the Sudan and some people calling for the death of the woman who presided over the teddy bear incident. I mean, how did you feel about that?
Well, Bill, I think that you have made the classic mistake of stereotyping an entire group of people because of the extreme acts of a few.
But here's where you're wrong. The actions of a few, and look, with 1.2 billion Muslims all over the world, you're right. Most Muslims aren't killing people. But those who are, sir, are killing hundreds of thousands of people. You see, a small percentage of 1.2 billion can do grave damage, and they're doing it. They're doing it. And nobody's stopping them from doing it, sir. That's my point.
Well, Bill, my point is that that being the case, that's a statement about them, not a statement about Islam or about Muslims. And what you are doing and what your other guest is doing is saying that their actions should cause us to feel threatened by all Muslims. Well, and that's just patently ridiculous.
I very clearly said extreme Muslims. I said it 7 times. You know, yes, most Germans weren't Nazis, yet Nazism challenged the world, threatened the world. But most Germans weren't members of that party and didn't go in to subscribe to kill people, innocent people. You, sir, what you're doing is you're rationalizing, and you're not seeing the danger because you're emotionally involved in the situation. But let me go back to the teddy bear. You should, and all 1.2 billion Muslims should rise up tomorrow and say, you don't kill a human being over a teddy bear, right? Am I right?
Oh, I think 1.2 billion Muslims have essentially said that. I mean,
no, they haven't. They haven't. We haven't heard anybody say that. Not one Muslim leader has said that.
I've heard every Muslim leader say that. I've heard every Muslim leader say that.
Quote one.
And in fact, those who are calling for execution are not the people who are in charge, and you know that, Bill.
No, I don't. The government of Sudan is in charge of the case. They've incarcerated. Do you think it's right to put a woman, an elderly woman, middle-aged woman, in jail for 13 days for calling a teddy bear Mohammed? Do you think that's right?
Of course not.
Well, that's what the government did.
That is extreme.
The government did that.
And it does not represent Islam. Well, they're wrong.
Hold it. It's an Islamic government. It's an Islamic government in Sudan, sir. 250,000 people are dead in Darfur. A woman's in jail for 13 days. It's an Islamic government. That's what it
down and let's discuss this. If we want to talk about extreme examples, we can look in this own country. We can look at some of the things.
You just won't confront the reality. You will make excuse after excuse. You will not confront reality. Islamic government allowing 250,000 people to be slaughtered, allowing a middle-aged teacher to be put in jail over a teddy bear, and you say, oh, it's worse over there. It's worse over there. All the leaders have condemned it. Ahmadinejad hasn't condemned it. I didn't hear Mubarak condemn it. I didn't hear Pakistan condemn it. I heard nobody condemn it. So let's tell the truth.
And why should it be treason? Let me go to Assam Qureshi. Surely you can see that any jihadists who swear allegiance to ISIS, whatever that body is, must be committing treason by the nature of it, aren't they?
Look, I think, these things are extremely complicated, and, using broad brush, terms and rhetoric around who these people are and what they believe in, I think is actually quite disingenuous.
Well, no, it's not disingenuous, because that's what the Foreign Secretary is talking about. He's talking about re-establishing this age-old, antiquated law to fill a gap that there is at the moment.
No, I don't think there is a gap. I mean, look, we have some of the most disproportionate legislation, across the whole of Europe in terms of how we deal with the threats that there are to the UK. In fact, rather than saying we need more laws or to reinvent old laws, we actually need to go back to the old criminal justice system, the way that we used to do things, which was based on evidence. Now, if people are committing war crimes, then yes, crimes should be held accountable. But the very idea that somehow anybody who goes over to Syria or Iraq should automatically be assumed to be joining up with ISIS, and that somehow that they've, kind of betrayed the UK, I don't think that necessarily marries up.
Not automatically. I don't think anyone thinks that it should happen automatically.
Well, that's a lot of the
but just very quickly,
is.
it's certainly not true to say that we have the most stringent or the most draconian or anything else laws.
But do we need treason as an extra law when we can cover it by looking at war crimes or murder? Why would you glorify
first of all, war
like
crimes is difficult. There's a particular issue in this country at the moment which you can feel politicians dancing around. Look at the one mentioned in your package about membership of prescribed organisations. My think tank's looked at this. We've had 3 occasions on which this legislation, which was brought in the 2000 Act, reinforced in the 2006 Act, it's only been used 3 times. It's a very weak piece of legislation, actually, which has a very small prison sentence associated with it. The problem is, and we saw it again the other week with the Theresa May, the Home Secretary's speech at the Conservative Party conference, where she was talking about, for instance, banning orders on people being allowed to speak in public. Now, a lot of us think that those are very illiberal and quite wrong measures to bring in. But there are already sort of sounds like that coming from politicians, because really what they're trying to grapple with is not the people who are actually, as it were, have actually killed somebody on the streets of Britain. It is what people are doing where they are trying to subvert and are actually willing to fight against this country.
I mean, there you have it, Assam Qureshi. These guys are going overseas, they are signing up to ISIS, they are burning their passports. What's wrong with this country turning round and saying, yes, that's treachery, you're not wanted here anymore, and that's the law that we will put on top of this crime?
Yeah, but I mean, the thing is that how does that help stop that flow from happening in the first place anyway? Look, the reality is the message that's been sent out by the UK government for the last 13 years of this war on terror is that we can do a whole range of things to you. We can imprison you in your own home.
Or maybe
we can take your passports away.
Maybe that we don't do enough.
Let me just finish, okay? Like, we can take your passports away. We can take your citizenship away. This is the message that keeps on coming up over and over again by successive Home Secretaries.
And Assam Qureshi's point is it hasn't worked for 13 years.
But that's
palpably nonsense. Palpably nonsense. At least one very major plot has been prevented most years by the police and security service in this country. We have seen many, many arrests, dozens and dozens of prosecutions in recent years of people found guilty in the British courts of crimes.
Of crimes?
Yes.
Exactly.
Exactly,
so
and that's the point.
Do you need
why do you need to use all of these tools and convince people that they don't...
I raise the point because Assam Qureshi very disingenuously tries to pretend that, as it were, he's against the particular law we're talking about tonight. He's not. He's against the previous laws that have successfully prosecuted people in this country.
Assam, we've run out of time. Let me give you the last word on this then. This is about trying to prevent a worse state of affairs than we are currently in.
And it's the counter-terrorism legislation that's resulted in that domestic policy in the UK is alienating and disenfranchising young Muslim men, which is the reason why they find comfort in the fact that they belong somewhere. If we make them feel like they belong here, no, that's nonsense. Because the thing is that if you speak to any of the people who are disenfranchised on the streets of London, they say the same thing, which is about counter-terrorism policy and the way that impacts.
I'm so sorry we've run out of time. Thank you both. Thank you both very much.
Let's pick up our conversation. First up, I want to read this poll. This is a recent Gallup poll. 38% of Americans, it says, that say that they would not support a Muslim candidate for president. So Dr. Ben Carson is not alone. So why do you think that is? First, you, Dean.
I think, honestly, there's a lot of components. One is only about 25% of Americans have a Muslim friend, and if you don't have one, I offer to be your Muslim friend. But in reality, that plays a role, because if all you see are negative images on the media of ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab, these horrible groups committing horrible acts in the name of Islam, coupled by some of the people on the right ginning up the fear, you're not going to feel warmly about Muslims. If I didn't know a Muslim, if I wasn't Muslim, and all I saw was that, I would not like Muslims either. And I think that's part of the problem. We have to get out there as much as possible. Armstrong Williams said, we don't denounce terrorism. We do, left and right. We need to get in the media more, and that's up to the gatekeepers to let us on, because I can assure you, Don, I write articles for CNN and Daily Beast denouncing, and so do numerous other Muslims, and we beg to come on TV. But what gets ratings on TV is sensationalism, not earnest Muslims saying terrorism is horrible, it doesn't represent our faith.
Sam?
That's part of it.
Sam?
Yeah, well, I think one thing to point out is that Ben Carson would have said the same thing about atheists. He would have said an atheist shouldn't be president. And in fact, if you look at the polls, Americans are more reluctant to vote for an atheist than for a Muslim by a factor of probably 20%. In fact, atheism is the only identity that that would prevent your election as a qualified member of your own party when people of your own party are polled. So, we can play this victim card. We can worry about political bigotry. It's a real problem, but it is visited upon atheists, it's visited upon other minorities, and what gets lost here, and what Dean, frankly, has really been a scandalous purveyor of.
Scandalous purveyor.
The efforts. Well, let me finish my sentence, Dean.
I'm excited.
I'll tell you what the problem is, and then you can defend yourself.
Please, thank you.
What you see here is an effort to paint Islam, the doctrine, as identical to every other religion on earth. There's no special problem with Islam as a political reality, Islamism, jihadism. There's no connection between the doctrine and the kind of terrorism and human rights abuses we see worldwide. And that is a lie. And it's a lie, and everyone knows it, whether you're a bigot or a reasonable person. It is a lie that is in plain view, and it has to be debunked by Muslims like Dean. And that's the crucial problem here. People like Dean need to be candid about the link between belief and behavior, and they need to be willing to reform the faith. And instead of being willing to do that, they call people like me bigots. And that is a huge problem for this conversation. It's decidedly unhelpful, and it's driving it's driving the polls apart. And I think we're going to wake up in a world that looks more like Western Europe at this point, where you have fascists calling the shots on both sides.
So my question is, Dean, I've heard people in the Muslim faith say the same thing, that there is and you and I have spoken about this. We spoke about it on your radio show this weekend. That there are people who are in the Muslim faith who have said this basically the same thing that Sam is saying, but yet and still don't get called bigoted or are somehow listened to, but he is not.
The messenger matters, Don. That's the truth. We know that. Sam knows that.
It doesn't matter. My co-author on this book was called a talking monkey by your friends.
So don't interrupt you. Now you interrupt me. Sam, you've called for religious and racial profiling of Muslims. A third of Muslims in a country.
I have not.
You've wrote it in your blog. I can read it out loud if you want.
Well, if you made an effort to understand my views, you would have a different story. We can talk about profiling, but you have not summarized my views accurately.
Let's continue on, though, and talk in the political realm. Dean, go ahead and answer my question, please.
Well, the question is, ISIS and Al-Qaeda are killing Muslims more than anybody. Do you not think we want ISIS and Al-Qaeda to be stopped? We very much want that to be done. We're having discussions internally in our community. We want to do more. I don't know how I'm going to reach someone in Pakistan, frankly, or Afghanistan.
So how do we fix this issue in the U.S. where you have a presidential candidate saying that a Muslim should not be president? You have 38% of the population saying the same thing. So
I think it takes time. The same way anti-Semitism in America in the 1930s and 40s was mainstream. The same way racism against African Americans was mainstream.
Right.
The same way anti-Catholicism in 1960. John Kennedy gave a famous speech, and maybe it takes some of us, and I have no problem giving that speech, that John Kennedy addressed it head on, that he believes in absolute war between church and state.
It's not just incumbent upon Muslims to do it. We all have to do it. I appreciate both of you, gentlemen. Thank you.
I address you as an atheist and a secularist and a Marxist. I'm very much troubled by your remarks about the need to stand up and fight this Muslim jihad. I have no time for oppressive religion of any stripe, but I think you are well aware of the long history of crimes committed by the British government in Iraq, the United States government in Vietnam, and today in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I'm wondering how you can possibly say that it is Western civilization, the civilization of the colonizers and the oppressors, who do it all, of course, in the name of liberation and democracy, how this is not the fundamental problem, rather than what you call the jihad of what I consider to be the response to the crimes of U.S. and European imperialism.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. There you have it. You see how far the termites have spread and how long and well they've dined. When someone can get up and say that in a meeting of unbelievers, that the problem is Western civilization, not the Islamic threat to it. That's how far the termites have got. Now, as a matter of fact, sir, I could have asked that question 50 times better than you did and answered it 50 times as comprehensively. If you like, I can, without conceit, refer you to a biography of mine of Henry Kissinger. That is a compendium and anthology of the war crimes committed by the United States and its allies in the Third World and elsewhere, and a call for those people, those responsible, to be arraigned for crimes against humanity and war crimes. It's a cheap paperback published by the New Left Review that anyone can get hold of, and I can't recommend too highly. One of those crimes, I'll just give you an example to show how utterly fatuous your implication is. One of those crimes was the arming and training of the Indonesian armed forces to take over the Republic of East Timor. Some of you are no doubt aware of this terrible atrocity. It's one of Noam Chomsky's best campaigns in writing, leading to the very near physical extirpation of the people of East Timor. A genocide more comprehensive than Cambodia, taking place a little afterwards, with our weapons, with our diplomatic protection, and with the endorsement of Kissinger and Ford. Hands up those who roughly remember this. Okay, not as good as I'd have liked, but still, and sad, but bear it in mind and look it up. Now, what are some of the items of the Al-Qaeda bin Laden manifesto? Well, oddly enough, and this was to my surprise, I thought it would be lower down. Item 3 in the charge against the West is that it reversed course on East Timor, tried to undo the genocide, brought East Timor to a referendum on independence, sent Jose Vieira de Mello, one of the greatest, Sergio Vieira de Mello, one of the greatest UN civil servants, to East Timor to supervise the transition to independence and the election, and made East Timor the newest member of the UN. Bin Laden says, "For this we will never forgive the Christian crusaders and their imperialist friends. They took away a republic from a Muslim land, Indonesia." Most of the people of East Timor, by the way, are Christian and speak Portuguese. A detail. For this, we will never forgive them. For this, that was the reason they gave for blowing up the UN office in Iraq, because that's where Melio was sent next, with a truck bomb of explosives so enormous that it must have been borrowed from the former Iraqi army and Ba'ath Party. That's the reason they gave for blowing up the Australian tourists in Bali, in Indonesia, and the Indonesian taxi drivers who were servicing that resort, because they couldn't forgive the West for its behavior in East Timor. In other words, if you want to avoid upsetting these people, you have to let Indonesia commit genocide in East Timor. Otherwise, they'll be upset with you. You'll have made an enemy. If you tell them they can't throw acid in the faces of unveiled women in Karachi, they will be annoyed with you. if you say, we insist, we think that cartoonists in Copenhagen can print satire on the Prophet Muhammad, you've just made an enemy. You've brought it on. You're encouraging it to happen. So unless you're willing to commit suicide for yourself and for this culture, get used to the compromises you'll have to make and the eventual capitulation that will come to you. But bloody well don't do that in my name, because I'm not doing it. You surrender in your own name, leave me out of it. I'm going to fight these people and every other theocrat all the way.